This is Pete Fletzer. Join us for a conversation with Luthien from Girls With Sabers.
It's very interesting being a content creator in this space when you're quote-unquote a Reylo.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy. Welcome to episode number 115 of Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer. Thank you so much for checking us out. If this is your first visit with Around the Galaxy, well, I hope you enjoy the ride, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. And if you do, make sure to like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. Follow us on all your social media channels at ATGcast. And, of course, you can also check out our website, atgcast.com, and that's also where you will learn about our Patreon offering. Our Patreon offering, also available at patreon.com/atgcast, allows you to be a part of the live virtual audience when we record with every single one of our guests. For just $3 a month, you will get a link, and you will be able to be a part of the conversation. And speaking of the conversation, you know, every week I am thrilled and fortunate to bring you conversations with authors and writers and celebrities and actors and superfans and creators, and this week is no different. I had the opportunity to speak to Luthien, who is half of the Girls With Sabers podcast. Unfortunately, her partner wasn't able to join us, but that's all right. We did have a fantastic conversation that started as sort of a typical Around the Galaxy, where we get to know somebody's fan history and what Star Wars means to them and how it's driven them to where they are today. And it turned into a very interesting sort of study of the state of fandom and the response and reaction from fans who come from very different angles about the Star Wars franchise. And I think if you look at this conversation as not a defense of Reylo or a condemnation of a certain type of fandom online, but you look at it as a conversation about the state of fandom, maybe you'll be able to take something a little bit different from this week's episode. So without further ado, I am very excited to bring you a conversation with Luthien from Girls With Sabers. Luthien, how are you?
Good. Glad to be here. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. Yep, it's only one half of us.
Yes, it's half of Girls With Sabers.
Unfortunately, but Emrys, like I said before, sends her best, and I will be manning the helm.
Excellent. So maybe for those that don't know the show or aren't familiar with you, maybe give us a little bit of background about you and Girls With Sabers.
Yep. So Girls With Sabers it'll be 3 years this June. And it just was born out of a love for not only Star Wars, but the sequel trilogy. And Emrys and I met in comment sections throughout the Star Wars community, being on the YouTube community. And we started messaging each other back and forth, and tons of similar likes and interests. And one day she said, "Hey, I have this idea and I'm wondering if you want to start." And I'm like, "I will do whatever you want me to do." So Girls With Sabers was born, and it has evolved into what it is now. And our main basis is YouTube, but we're all over social media as well. And we do podcasting, we do live streams, we do video essays, video edits, and it's been a wild ride.
So what was your introduction to Star Wars? You said you got together with Em through your love of the sequel trilogy, but when did you get into Star Wars for the first time?
So for me, it was the original trilogy, and it was actually my mother. And I have about 7.5 year older than me and my twin sister, half brother. And when my mother and father were married, my brother was around 7 years old, and Star Wars was humongous, you know, late 70s, definitely early 80s. So you had cusp of Return of the Jedi. Right before my sister and I were born, it was Return of the Jedi, and they re-released all of the films in theaters before this came out. So my brother took my mom, his stepmother, and she was just blown away by this. And he had action figures and all this stuff. And she's like, "This is amazing." And she's like, "I can't wait to share this with my daughters." So it had to have been 90, 91. I remember going to the video store when they existed back in those days. Yeah. And it wasn't Blockbuster. It was like your in-town, like,
Joe's video
mom and
shop,
pop.
Right?
Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
selling more than just VHS. But anyway, so it's like you never went into the back room with the
what's
beats.
behind that curtain over there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I remember bringing home the VHS of A New Hope, and 7-year-old me is just, what is this? This is amazing. And you think now, it's like, oh my God, showing a 7-year-old Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's burnt bodies. You're like, oh, would I do that to my kid? But I remember just sitting there going, oh my God, their bodies are burned. And I'm not excited about that, but like just the whole thing in general.
Dead bodies. No, that was
yeah. But but my mom sat and watched it with us and, explained some things. But other than that, I just fell in love with it.
Mm.
And we did it all. We did the whole trilogy. And then anytime it was on TV, it was one of those films where you stop everything and you watch it. And that carried me. And that was one of my first real introductions to the realm of fantasy. And I wouldn't even call it sci-fi. I mean, you can. I mean, some people put that moniker on it. But yeah, after that, it was just a wonderful love with Star Wars. And the prequels, I was very much in high school and then out of high school by the time those all came out. So I did see all of them except Phantom Menace. Excuse me, Phantom Menace.
Yeah, not Phantom Menace.
Freudian slip. Phantom Menace, I remember we rented the DVD of, and I've never seen it all the way through. I'm going to be honest. I've never seen it all the way through.
You've never watched, wait, you have a podcast and you've never seen the Phantom Menace all the way through.
I have seen the Phantom Menace.
Okay.
I have seen the whole film, but I have not seen it from start to finish all together.
Interesting.
It's one of our things is we're going to sit down and actually do it with all of our stuff. And I've seen Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, as much as I need to. But yeah.
Is it because you don't love the movie? Is it because it just doesn't maintain your attention span? Or is it?
It is because a little book was introduced to me called The Lord of the Rings around that time. Mm-hmm. And my focus completely shifted. And I mean, completely 180'd. So that's really where my focus went in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then hearing about the sequel trilogy, I got super excited again. Yeah. And that just kind of went on from there. But I have no one but my mother to thank for introducing me to Star Wars.
That's great.
And my brother too, I guess, by proxy. But
yeah, it's interesting because I think it wasn't too long ago there was some social media activity going around, people asking, did anybody's mother introduce them to Star Wars? And it was kind of interesting because a surprisingly high number of people have been introduced, and I think it kind of goes to that misperception, and maybe it's misperception is probably the wrong word. It's probably more likely to be older way of thinking that, yes, literally my father introduced me to Star Wars and Close Encounters and all that stuff. But I think that there's still this belief that, oddly enough, even with the high percentage of female fans in the Star Wars base, that it's still a boys franchise in many ways, at least when you think back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But so, I mean, that's quite interesting. Do you think that because your mother introduced it to you, it made it easier for you to kind of get into it without feeling sort of outside?
I think so. I think for me, because a woman introduced it to me, I already had that feminine perspective right there sitting with me watching and explaining. And not that I didn't watch it with my brother or my father, because I did. But my mother was the one who was home with me and my sister. So she's the one we watched it with. And I never, ever had the problem of gatekeeping. Not until I became a content creator, finishing Star Wars, going to school, telling my friends about it. I mean, we all kind of loved it. And sure, I was able to kind of play in both courts where I had my girlfriends and we all did that stuff. And then I had my guy friends and, just group of friends, but they all love Star Wars and they had their playing cards and their action figures. And I'm like, but I could keep toe to toe with them as to what was in the original trilogy and what they're talking about. I'm like, oh, I know that, and this happened, and no, you're remembering that wrong. It's happened this way, and I just watched it yesterday, but they were all very welcoming about it. It's not like they tried to make me prove how much of a fan I was. That's never something that I experienced. For me, my experience with other fans and friends was very welcoming. And once they pulled out their Star Wars cards, I was like, I'm done, and I'm going to go over here. And but I did, I'd sit and watch too. That was also not a big deal for me, but it was very welcoming. My Star Wars experience growing up was very healthy.
But did you experience gatekeeping even before the internet had taken over the Star Wars conversation?
No, none. And that's the God's honest truth.
Yeah.
I think because Leia was such a strong character and such a strong female lead and presence in the series that I never had a problem. I never felt that. I never sat there watching Where Are All the Women?
Right.
I watched the film. I love Luke. I love Han. I love Lando. I loved Leia. I loved it all. And I just, as I evolved into a mature woman and continued watching these films, and so my perception of it is also evolving. She's carrying the torch, but it works.
Right.
It works. And this story is more, of course, Luke's journey than anything. Luke and his father. Her character was strong enough to carry this, and it was strong enough to carry my love for the film. So when I went to friends and we talked about it, I'd say everything I loved about Leia, and we kept talking, but it helped that I also loved everything else about it.
Right.
Ewoks, Lando, Boba Fett, everything. I guess I was just very fortunate that I never had the type of friends that, quote unquote friends, that thought that my enjoyment was somehow inferior. That I wasn't, just because I'm a girl means that I couldn't enjoy it as much as they could.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. I think the position that Leia played in the trilogy, the original trilogy, made her, and it was also a different time where people weren't necessarily looking for it. And I know that sounds wrong, but the fact that she was there was actually, one of the first interviews I did was with a really good friend of mine. He's an author named Bill Pricestock, and he talks about how, seeing Leia in 1977 was like, wow, this woman kicks ass, and we haven't seen that before. And without Leia, you don't get Ripley and Aliens. You don't get those strong female characters, and it's carried through. But what's interesting is I think for people like me, who I consider myself very fortunate, but I also recognize that I'm in this very weird sort of generational cusp, in that, to me, strong women characters don't mean anything, right? It's not a negative or a positive. It's a good character, right? Hey, there's a great woman character in this movie. That's awesome. Oh, Leia is, she's the one that saves Han and Luke on the Death Star. That's great. Cool. I don't care if it's her or Chewbacca or C-3PO. It was a character, but you definitely I can understand where people were coming from. And you seem to have come in through that. Now, the internet and the sequel trilogy came together and exposed where some of that ugliness still is. I love your sort of tagline, which is pop analysis from two women with compassionate hearts and sharp minds. Talk to me about why you feel like you had to start in that position, or is it, and to feel like you had to start there, I'm making an assumption, but it feels like there might have been a need for you to create a space that you wanted to expand. Am I right in making that sort of assumption?
Yes, definitely. Because women can be more than just one thing.
Right.
And I think that's why, you can have a sharp mind, but you can, and wit and a sharp tongue, but you can also be compassionate. And I think that that's a very important thing for everyone to remember. Male, female, you identify as male or female. And so many times women in general, and especially women in fandom, can be compartmentalized,
Mm-hmm.
put, pigeonholed, put into a stereotypical box of, only liking one thing or only having one view
Mm-hmm.
about certain things. And I know it was very important for us to let people know that we can stand strong in this fandom, but we still have compassion for other people and other people's viewpoints. And so
Right.
that's why we really had that tagline in there.
For people who've seen the phrase but may not know how it's defined, talk to me about the phrase feminine gaze, and what does that mean as far as storytelling goes, and maybe then also specifically to the sequel trilogy.
Right. So even though Leia is a huge part of the original trilogy, we really didn't see a majority of the film play out through her eyes
Mm.
and through her perception. So that's what a feminine gaze is. We finally get in the sequel trilogy a main female character, and we are seeing everything through her lens, and especially leading up to The Last Jedi. She asks a pretty important question.
Mm-hmm.
What is my place in all this? And we're finding out her fears, and we're finding out her strengths, and we're finding out her weaknesses, all in the span of 2.5 hours.
Mm.
It's hard to get an action-packed film with the gravitas that Star Wars has, where it is through a female lens. And yes, we had Padme in the prequel trilogy, but that still wasn't feminine gaze enough. It was still very much through Anakin's eyes, through Obi-Wan's eyes,
Mm-hmm.
male dominated. But if anyone is ever going to understand the female side of things, you have to look through a feminine gaze. And you don't have to be feminine or female identifying to, hit the nail on the head.
Mm-hmm.
What Rian Johnson did is he listened. He
Right.
wrote, but then he researched and he listened to many women who were probably in his ear or female identifying people and went, okay, he got it. Rey didn't want to be a Jedi. She just wanted belonging. She wanted to, for someone to come back for her.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't grow up pretending to be a Jedi and idolizing Luke. She idolized Han, the smuggler. I mean, that's who she identified with.
Right.
So being a Jedi was never on her radar, or being powerful. She just wanted her family back.
And so to tell the story from that it's interesting because you're right. I think even where the hero of the story is female, we still quite often we're looking at her versus seeing the story from her perspective. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And why do you think that caused, or was that the cause of some of the riff in the fandom?
I think because we're not used to seeing that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're used to seeing what they're doing instead of what they're seeing and what they're feeling. A big femme gaze film would be Wonder Woman. It's one of the biggest ones that people can remember. And in the first film, Diana finally getting to the earthly realm, and she sees that baby, and then she starts cooing the baby, and she goes, oh baby, and people lost their shit over that. Like,
right.
She can be both. Like, she can be a strong woman but also coo over a baby.
Right.
But that is the feminine gaze. That is her longing in the second film, her longing for Steve, and her finally coming to terms with losing him and then learning how to fly. That is femme gaze. I really didn't care for Wonder Woman 2, but that whole sequence, chef's kiss.
Yeah.
Patty Jenkins, that was phenomenal. That is such at its feminine core, to have to get over such a grief and that helps find yourself. I mean, we all deal with grief, but I think it's a very feminine thing at its core to nurture and to want to protect and care for the things that you love and the things that are around you. And when you can't do that, when you don't have those things, or those things have never been there, or you lost them, some women do brush it aside, but a lot of women that is a very inward pain.
Yeah.
A very inward ache.
Yeah, no, I
Mhm.
definitely, I understand. That's great. A great way to define it. I think
Mm.
if I'm hearing you, and I think this is really important, and maybe this is why it's a challenge for certain people, is that it is it's that ability to tell the story with a female centered story and not leave out the parts that make her, right?
Right.
It's not making Rey a male character that happens to be played by a female, right?
Right.
It's actually taking into account and showing that, look, I mean, the romance that that was alluded to in The Last Jedi, and I say alluded to only because it never really was completed by JJ, right? So we could talk about that in a moment as well.
Yeah.
But just that sort of, that she cared about Luke, she cared about Kylo, she cared about Chewbacca. Like she had that other side,
Yes.
which is kind of difficult when you're looking for a gladiator with a sword and killing monsters. Like that's a very sort of masculine approach to the character, and kudos to Rian Johnson for being able to soften that character. I mean, I think speaking of Rian Johnson's expertise, I think what he did with Knives Out is a very similar thing in that.
Yes.
Why can't I think of the main character's name? She was amazing. The protagonist in
Yes.
yeah. But
it's lost on me right now too.
Yeah,
It's
I can see her face.
Yep. Anna de
And,
Armas. I just can't remember who she played.
Right.
Yeah.
But she definitely, you saw not just, okay, I'm in trouble, how do I deal with this? But you got a sense of who she was as a person. And that's a different thing. But so back to my first question, why is that difficult for a portion of the fan base to handle? And I don't expect you to have the ultimate answer, but I mean, what it did was it caused people to sort of branch off. And we talked a little bit earlier about, you and Em are very big into what has been called the Reylo culture, and Reylo has really
a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, hey, you have blue butterflies in your Twitter account.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But I mean, and here's the thing: like, I can completely understand and want to enjoy a film from every single perspective, and I love to get these different things. But there are people who reacted incredibly negatively to people who dared to say that, hey, there is some sort of romance involved. Now, as Jason Fry put it, it may not be traditional romance, but these people literally have been inside each other's heads, which is something that nobody in our world can even experience. So there's a certain intimacy. But why do you think, just because that's something that you identified with and many, many, many people identified with and wanted to learn more about and see more about, why is that such a challenge for people to accept? Is it because it's not their Star Wars? Or
the first word that came to my mind is vulnerable, because it forces people to feel very vulnerable. It's one of the most vulnerable things you can do, is to put yourself out there romantically, or you have feelings for each other. I mean, that's why they call them crushes initially,
Right.
is because you get crushed like half the time. But you have to be vulnerable. You have to take risks. You have to go out on a limb and go, hey, do you like me? I mean, do you really like not just as a friend, like,
right? Do you like me? Right.
Exactly. And when we see something like that on screen that we're not used to, especially like Han and Leia was such magnetism, but he very much made her feel uncomfortable, got into her space.
Right.
And I mean, I could go down a different tangent road with that, but got into her space. The thing with Kylo and Rey is that it very much, and we know this now with Ryan's recent interviews, that he did play it romantic. He did base it off Pride and Prejudice. And I think that's another thing why people, certain parts of the fandom go, oh, I don't want to touch it. Like, it's because it's Jane Austen. It's because it's Charlotte Bronte. It's because it's this old world style of writing that females and female identifying people have latched onto,
right,
and have brought into this space where oh, you know what, that's just a romance novel, or that's for girls, or that's this and that's that. I think if more men read Jane Austen
Mm-hmm.
and read Bronte and Gaskell and all these great literary women, they would have seen the signs that were there.
I wonder if that's why we have that kind of not my Luke Skywalker perspective, and maybe
Yeah.
it's a bigger statement. It's like, this is not what I expect to see in a Star Wars movie, right?
Oh yeah. I'm the first to admit I saw The Last Jedi and walked out of the theater and I went, It took my second viewing to really go, okay, what is really happening here?
right,
And then definitely talking to M, and then my third view, and I was like, okay, men and women aren't listening to each other.
right.
You see Rey and Kylo, even in the Force bonds, they're not really listening to each other, and he's telling her hard truths. Poe and Holdo aren't listening to each other. At least Poe's not listening to Holdo. Finn isn't listening to Rose. So the whole time you're going through these three different scenes in this circle, and it's just about the opposite sex not listening to each other. And that really actually made me appreciate the Poe and Holdo moments a lot more than I did in my first viewing. But isn't just the battle of the sexes? It's just Ryan took that and went, everyone's going to have conflict in this second film. I mean, it's what happens in the second film. You see that in Empire Strikes Back, and you see that in Attack of the Clones. But everyone was trying to get their words in, trying to be heard in The Last Jedi.
It's interesting too, because I think it's you're 100% right in that it was sort of a disconnect between two people, but people who, I don't think it helped that it came out at a very sort of high tension time in this country and in the world.
And I was going to mention that later too. Yeah, it was people want their films to be escapism. And yes, of course, you can make the argument that the OT, paralleled Vietnam and blah, blah, blah. I'm not blah, blah in Vietnam. I'm just saying, that's right. Also like a tangent. But people want to escape. People want to forget about what is going on out there. And for 2.5 hours, they just want to escape in their seat.
Yep.
And when, I think when Last Jedi came out, it was Me Too, it was Trump, it was all these things. And people were just like, it's so loud. I need to escape. And then they go into The Last Jedi, and The Last Jedi is what it is, The Last Jedi. And they're like, I didn't escape at all.
But do you think, I mean, the argument often is that Ryan Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy are shoving a political agenda down our throat, when in reality is perception, right? But from my perception, it was not, I never saw it as Holdo shutting down a man. I saw it as a loudmouth subordinate being insubordinate to a superior and had to deal with the consequences. I saw it, and again, I think it kind of goes.
Oh, he would have been court-martialed.
Sure.
I mean,
right, and it didn't matter if it was Akbar or Holdo. It was he was disagreeing on the bridge with his superior. Can't do that. And Luke's decisions. The fact that Luke was dealing with all the emotional baggage and everything that comes along with it, and the 30 years in between movies that we don't see it on screen, but we can only make the assumption if we were told in The Force Awakens he ran away from everything. So I never saw it as here's another politically correct lesson from Hollywood know-it-alls trying to shove a message. To me, it was a reflection of the way the characters are, and it just so happens that they were putting themselves in situations that kind of mirrored some of the really crummy situations that were going on in our world. And that's I think therein lies some of the biggest challenge with Last Jedi for the audience, is that, to your point, it's not it's not pure escapism, right? It's not
Right.
Death Star trenches and robots. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's both. It's a heavy movie, and much like you, and I've said this on my show 100 times. When I walked out of The Last Jedi, I said to my friend, this was both the best and worst Star Wars movie I've ever seen, because
Mm-hmm.
it was so, I knew there was such a story there, but I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I feel like I was exhausted emotionally.
Yes.
And that's not what you get from Star Wars. Star Wars, you walk out exhilarated. And I
Yeah.
walked out like, oh man. And then to your point, second and third time, I started to understand the story. I started to get a hold of, this is what Luke went through. I started
Mm-hmm.
to really appreciate, I really started to appreciate Rey and Kylo's relationship. Again, it's funny. I never jumped to the full-on romance, but I am so appreciative of people who brought that perspective from, you were talking about some of your literary history, and you applied
Mm-hmm.
that, and clearly Ryan had that as a perspective, and you picked up on it, and that's what worked in that story for a lot of people. And I don't think that makes it a bad Star Wars movie. It makes it a very deep and difficult and personal / intimate Star Wars story.
Yes.
And that's a different type of movie.
Yes. Absolutely. Intimate is a very good word for it. Definitely with our art, dramatics, English, lit backgrounds, so many people, lots of women and women identifying, saw this. And with our knowledge of the classic literature of Jane Austen, Bronte, this, going ever on, we went, it's that. It
Yeah.
is Jane Eyre in space. It is Pride and Prejudice in space.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not having such a background. You'll go into the film, and if it's your first viewing, you're going to come out of there and go, what did I just watch? Like you said, it's both my favorite and least favorite Star Wars film.
Right.
And that's kind of the genius of Ryan, where he's forcing people, for better or for worse, to question, to see it again,
Mm-hmm.
to talk to other people. And yeah, it is hands down probably the most intimate Star Wars film.
Like I said, it's an emotionally exhausting
And
film.
it's personal. Sorry to interrupt you. It's
Yeah.
personal for everyone. And I think that's why when The Last Jedi came out, there was such ferocity from both sides of loving it and hating it, that because it's a personal baby to everyone. The franchise is a personal thing for everyone, and you want to protect that. And I can't blame people. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are certain people who will clickbait and are doing it for money and
Yep.
this, but I have had conversations with the people who are deeply hurt by what happened to Luke, and I don't blame them.
Yep.
I do feel like they're putting the blame on the wrong people. I mean, JJ put Luke on Octu, not Ryan.
Right.
Right. But
I'm glad you said that. I'm going to
Yeah.
make that my argument from now on, because it 100%. I didn't even think of it that way for some reason. I don't know why, but you are 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah. Luke, I mean, JJ put Luke into exile. JJ started that off of, Luke, Han saying everything he did about Ben, and that was the tipping point. And I feel that people do forget, and there have been wonderful threads on Twitter. I'm not the first to say this, but so much damage was done to the Skywalker family and Solo family, that how could you not? I mean, Luke losing his father, Luke losing his adoptive parents, Leia losing her adoptive parents. I mean, and then finding out this knowledge that, getting out, Darth Vader was the father. I mean, add it all in. How could there not be trauma? How could there not be all of this building up, all this scar tissue You're trying to push it down. In the midst of all this, Luke is trying to help Leia feel the Force, and then she literally feels Ben inside of her. This is a pulsing, living band of light. I mean, so now Leia's in, but Luke's off, looking for his stuff, and she feels alone, but yet she still feels in the Force. I mean, it's all over the place. Plus, she and Han are having problems. I'm like, it's all over the place. And now you have this Force-sensitive child who's like going nuts, and I don't know how to raise him. And where's Luke? And one, I think Luke will be the best for him. I mean, it's so much. And these are for fictional characters.
Right.
So.
Well, and it's interesting because you even referenced Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings, while having some of that onion peeling in there, is still ultimately about, it doesn't dig into, how much pressure's on Frodo, like how much like this responsibility to return. So that's there, but it's not examined to the depth.
It's certainly Peter, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, they certainly had a road ahead of them to try to make Frodo more susceptible to what the ring was doing. In the book, you see that and you read that, but Tolkien being Tolkien is like, takes a really long time to say. Like, I feel like Tolkien probably like really identified with the Ents and how long it took to, tell something. But you see that more in the film, just how burdensome being a ring bearer is.
Right.
And you definitely see that. And I feel this parallel. Oh, this is content right here. It's like, I'm also like putting this in the back of my brain, paralleling Frodo and Luke, where you see Frodo at the end, and he's writing the Red Book of Westmarch, and he's finishing it and finishing Bilbo's stories and putting it all together. And still, even though it's been years, the journey has now weighed on him so much that he now has to go to the Undying Lands in order to heal. Because it's just this adventure, this trauma, this weight can only be lifted there. And his friends don't understand. I feel that was Luke, where, of course, it would be so traumatic to even have an inkling of a thought of, oh my gosh, I looked into my nephew's mind and I saw what he was going to become and how much destruction that would be, not only from his hand, but the trickle-down effect to everything else around him. And I felt that was such, beautiful is not the right word, but it was a beautiful moment that Ryan captured, because it was all perspective. And for me, knowing what I know about Luke, that would have ripped Luke apart, which it did, which we saw. So why wouldn't that be the icing on the cake to make him exile himself? Plus, he thought, he didn't see, he thought Kylo struck down the rest of his students and took some with him. Obviously, that's not the case, and we see that in extended comic literature. But for Luke, oh my God, this is my fault. And what if I would have just talked to him? What if I did this? All these what ifs go through his mind. I mean, and then coming at the end and Crate being all about atonement. Holy cow. The salt, the blood, everything. Going, and it's twofold, going to help the resistance and help his sister, but also apologizing to his nephew and knowing full well that he's going to want to strike me down. He is that upset, and I will let him, because if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, but it will wreck you. It'll hurt you just like you struck down your father. But Luke lets him do it. Why? Because it's just like he needs to get that out. And it was the most badass moment. I remember my whole theater cheering when they saw Luke cross-legged back on Ahch-To. They just went wild. They went wild. And
even look, when the guy who wrote the novelization of it says on my show that he said, I'm not going to go down and face down the entire First Order with a laser sword in my
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. And honestly, I think that's one of the things that's so difficult. And this is why it's a dangerous path to tread. But the reality is, when somebody has a problem with this movie that's so deeply rooted, it's not what their arguments are, because Luke
Mhm.
actually gave
Mhm.
us all that badass moment that we wanted to see from the comic books, where he was literally standing in front of 5 Imperial First Order
Exactly.
walkers, and they fired on him, and they attacked him. And what did he do to do that? Not only did I think your point is 100% accurate, in that not only did he went there to save Leia as much as he
Yes.
went there to save, or try to save, Ben, right?
Yes.
And what's more powerful than that? And the fact that he knew he had to give his life to do it, whether he was struck down literally, which is a way they could have done that scene,
Yes.
or the way he did it through this force projection, which sucked the life out of him, was, it's just a different way to do the same exact thing. We just got it in a way, and it becomes a very lazy argument to say that was not the Luke Skywalker that I wanted. And I think that's a very weak argument against that film. And then to say that at the same time, to pile on I'm being thrust with a political agenda, it's lazy. It's as lazy as some of the writing in The Rise of Skywalker, but that's a whole other conversation another time.
There's a big difference between that is not the Luke I wanted and that is not Luke.
Correct. Yes.
And it's amazing that the Luke that Luke Skywalker projected from Octu is the Luke everyone wanted. Badass. The score that is running behind him is badass. He's silhouetted in the doorway like a frickin' John Wayne Western. I mean, he is walking out there and facing his nephew. And and the moment, I love that he got to see his sister, and that bond is so strong that she felt him. I love the kiss that was ad-libbed by Hamill. Oh my God. But that bond is so strong between the two of them, and he puts the dice in her hand and said, no one is ever really gone. And that is twofold. That is Han, and that is her son.
Yep.
And the fact that, and from a mother's perspective now, she is the one silhouetted and hearing and seeing her son's ship coming at her. And it's very much parallel to Emperor Strikes Back, where she has to close the doors on Han and Luke, and they are somewhere out there. And now she's closing the door on her son and Luke, and they are somewhere out there. And she is alone again. Oh, it's just, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
Well, and there's your feminine gaze again, right?
Yes,
because we see,
exactly.
we feel that emotion and that pain, not because Luke stopped by,
right,
but because we see the way she had to deal with it. And
and that is the feminine gaze.
I hadn't thought about what you said about the Hoth relationship as well, because that's 100% correct too, because that was very early in the relationship, but the feelings were strong, and now she's lived through 30 years with both of them, and there it is again, and her son is out there with them. So that's an amazing way to look at it. I love that. That's great.
I can't claim that as my own. Again, there's so many women out there, bloggers, meta writers, what have you. And again, it's hard because they're writing beautiful analysis. But then that is, I wouldn't call it an echo chamber, but you don't have the part of the fandom that would need to see that, seeing that, reading that, listening to it, understanding it. And it's only through collaborations like this where any of those types of thoughts can go out to a broader audience. So I just want to thank you for asking us and having me on. It's really one of the ways that people can hear just a different perspective.
Well, I appreciate that as well, and I'm glad to have you on, because I think As I mentioned before we got on, I'm not. I come at the franchise from a slightly different
Of
perspective, of
course.
course.
Mhm.
But one of the last things I wanted to ask you about is has the so the Reylo the Reylo social media positioning had it really ramped up before The Last Jedi. I mean, before Rise of Skywalker.
Mhm.
And where is it now? Where do you see are people who have this really close attachment to Last Jedi like yourself? Are you still in your own group? Has it subsided at all? Is it gotten worse? I mean, or is it still the same? Has the social media or even probably just general interactions with people who don't see The Last Jedi the way you do, has that changed at all?
It's really like macro and microeconomics, where you have ebbs and flows and a roller coaster, and some days it's really great, and then all of a sudden the next day it's like, what the hell just happened? Like, what bomb just exploded? It's very interesting being a content creator in this space when you're quote unquote a Reylo,
Mm-hmm.
where some people want everything to do with you, and then another part don't want anything to do with you. I love seeing, and I'd say I love loosely, but I think it's very interesting, and I get very analytical with it, where I'll see someone follow us and say on Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
and it's another channel. I'm like, oh, cool. And then I click them and then I refresh and then I'm like, oh, they're not following us anymore. Oh,
Right.
I wonder why that is. But then I talked to Matt from Blue Bantha Milk Co. about
Mm-hmm.
this, where I completely stopped looking at our analytics and
Yeah.
I completely stopped looking at our numbers and our growth and who unfollows us and who's following us. And, I feel I'm leading a healthier life. But being such a casual fan of Star Wars before becoming a content creator, and I was saying this to you before, I really have this out of box experience of all of it as well, where I'll see all this discourse and I'm like, well, I gotta go to work. I gotta make dinner. I got to go on a walk. My husband and I are going out of town. Like I gotta
Yeah.
do all these things. And I think it's because Star Wars is so personal, getting back to that, where people feel like they have to keep fighting for it and what they believe it is and what their perception of it is. And that certainly is important. And, I feel like fight the fights that need fighting, but
Right.
don't spread the fire.
Right.
I the cancel culture is a very interesting thing. I mean, it became so much that there's a moment we had to go on hiatus from Twitter's a cesspool of evil. I'm just going to throw that out there. It became so much that we went on hiatus, and then I just unfollowed everyone. I'm like, cool, we can't get canceled if I'm not following anybody.
That's right.
Like,
Yeah.
I can't handle when, and I get it's coming from a good place, but there'll be people who will DM us, and this is all over, like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Like, oh, did you see this person posted and you're following them? Did you know you're following them? I'm like, okay, first of all, I don't even know what's going on.
Right.
Second, let me look into this and see what's happening. And sometimes it's like, oh God, okay, like I don't agree with that. But other times it's like, okay, well, they do have every right to say what they just said. And I literally sit there like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Do
Well,
I keep following them and risk people canceling us and getting upset? Or do I, what do I do in this space being a content creator? Like, it can be a very mean girl. It can be
yep.
very cliquey, and it's nuts. It's nuts. And then you have other fandoms like coming in and jumping in and putting their 2 cents, and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm in in my late 30s. I can't believe I'm dealing with this bullshit.
Yeah, I'm still dealing. Well, it's funny. Matt Harrington here, one of our patrons, said he has no problem with anyone's Star Wars views or opinions as long as they're not trolling or bullying other fans. And I think that
I agree with that.
that's, it's funny. I said to you before we got on that I've taken sort of this take no prisoners kind of attitude, or actually more like take no bullshit sort of attitude when it comes to Twitter. It's like, look, either be a decent person or don't. And if you're not, go away. And it's very clear when people are trolling, and it's very clear, there's people who literally just look for somebody to say something positive about Rian Johnson and then jump all over that comment. And to me, that's not just trolling. That's a very sad way to live your life. But there's that next level of, I hear what you're saying, and I do agree. Like, as I alluded to, The Rise of Skywalker to me is my number 11 Star Wars film of all 11 films. And for multiple reasons, but it doesn't mean that I don't like the movie. It doesn't mean that I don't respect the rest of the franchise. It doesn't mean that if it's their number one and I know people where it is, that's fantastic. And I love that. Never should anybody have that sort of ownership. I don't own Star Wars. Girls with Sabers doesn't own Star Wars. Honestly, Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm, and Disney, they own the rights, but they don't own it's all of ours, right?
Right.
And I think people lose sight of the phrase, Star Wars is for everyone. It means, my son who's 8 years old and loves Clone Wars, that's his Star Wars. Does he watch the movies? He doesn't have the attention span or interest really in watching the original trilogy because it's Star Wars. But does that mean he's not a Star Wars fan? Hell no. He's got piles of toys and he loves Star Wars and he loves what it brings to him. And if you got something out of The Last Jedi that made you feel like they're listening to the way I want to receive stories, then it's a win. And if you didn't like it, there's 10 other movies you can watch. There's
exactly
content.
And that's what I just ask from people who are still naysayers and trollers and whatever have you, that try to see this through someone else's eyes. Like, why would The Last Jedi appeal to so many people? And if I can just get through to one person, then it's all worth it.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think that's a really great point. It's try to ask why don't you like something, or why do you like something? And and see, this is where the fandom menace issue is, or the trollers, or the online bullies, as Matt was referencing before. That's where the problem is like, I mean, and I'm sure if we talked for another hour, we would find things that we disagree on in Last Jedi, right? But a good conversation asks why you disagree with me. And I look, it's Star Wars fandom is not about winning. It's not about being it's not about making sure that you are correct, that you are gatekeeping. If any fan, and I say Star Wars fandom, but it's any fandom. It's more about shared enjoyment. And if you don't have that, then maybe this isn't the right place to hang out. And this is why I have that take no prisoners, take no shit sort of perspective lately, is look, do you want to have a conversation about why I thought Last Jedi worked and you didn't? Let's do that. That's great. Let's have that conversation. It's funny. I posted on Twitter the other day. I walked into my chiropractor's office. I was wearing one of my Star Wars shirts, and we started talking, and I spent 25 minutes talking about Star Wars while he's like cracking my back and stuff. But it's funny because he's like, how did you feel about Last Jedi? And I was like, oh no, how's this gonna go?
You find out everyone asks that, like that's what they lead off with,
right? That's kind of like that's the litmus test. That's the
litmus test.
And he was like, because I didn't like it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I actually liked it. And he's like, oh, really? Would you? And did I change his mind? Absolutely not. No. Did he think different of me? No. I mean, we were able to have a conversation, and because two reasons. One, he's a professional adult, and number two, it wasn't on Twitter, so he couldn't shout and then run away. He couldn't say you're an idiot and whatever else they want to say on Twitter and run away. It forced to have a conversation. I was in I was in my GameStop one day and I was buying some Star Wars Pops. Surprise, surprise. And a guy standing there was like, "Oh, I did not like the sequel trilogy." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Why?" And we just had a great conversation. And I think because, and you may feel this too, is because we spend time on Twitter, when somebody starts there, like immediately we're like, "Oh no, where's this going to go?" And then you realize that in real life, people are going to have a conversation about it, which is where it should be. And blowing off steam in Twitter is not great. You and I talked about it before we got on, about that sort of, when you get attacked for the first time by an opposing viewpoint in Twitter and they come at you hard, it's literally, it's scary.
Yes.
And for the people who use social media and use content creation and use fandom as a place to deal with the horrific things this world has thrown at us the last couple of years, it can be soul crushing. It can be more than that. It can literally lead to people going to the ultimate extreme and dealing with their depression and dealing with their challenges. And I don't understand the value to pushing somebody there, and what kind of a person takes that kind of joy in going after you because you happen to see a different perspective in The Last Jedi than I did, and going at you hard and calling you names and sending your friends after you. It makes no sense. And I don't understand how that is something somebody wants to do unless they have an even more challenges in their life that they're taking out there. It's just, I'm not expressing it properly, probably because
no,
of
I
medicine,
completely understand where you're going and what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I will be the first one to admit that there is safety in anonymity.
Yep.
And when no one can see your face, especially on a platform like Twitter, and you're not creating to the point where people are seeing your face. I'm not saying that's no one should do that, but
Right.
you're putting yourself out there, especially if you're showing your face and telling people your real name.
Right.
And there's a level of trust and vulnerability, and I am allowing you to come into a personal space such as this and watch me talk and watch me create. And with social media, the majority of people are followers and subscribers who don't do that. Maybe, their photo isn't their icon or their whatever, but and maybe their real name is up there. But for the most part, they are communicating in anonymity, and inhibitions tend to go away with that. And everything's a hot take. And I feel that this is a very generational thing too. I certainly feel that I am old enough to where I wouldn't call it getting the best of both worlds, but my toes were certainly dipped in both pools at the same time, where I had the luxury of sitting down and having a normal fan conversation with friends. Like, we weren't online. We were just talking about it. Literally people sitting in front of me where I can see their face, I can read their expressions, and I can hear their tone. You get none of that on the day-to-day basis. That is social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So if you're already coming in and reading something irritated, you're going to read it like they had an irritated tone. You're giving and you're assuming their tone. You're assuming they're hostile, or, put anything you want there. It now becomes a game of assuming, and a lot of times projecting. A lot of times people's words are taken out of context. Only one tweet is shown, but yet there was a slew of other tweets before that or after that. But again, I feel it's just very generational where younger people, this is what they know. This is how they interact. It's very fast paced, and you can say that about every generation, saying the next generation is very fast paced, but it is. A tweet literally happens in seconds, and it's there, and you can't edit it. You can only delete it, and blocking and whatever have you. And I think both can be said for sides. Getting back to the Reylo fandom, I feel it's interesting that people outside the fandom talking about Reylos they don't know how to talk about them or
Right.
one certain aspect. So then, I mean, you could say the same thing about the Fandom Menace. So this goes both ways, but they all get lumped together.
Yep.
So I do take issue with that. But again, my out of box perception of all this is that is the nature of the beast, where the only thing that maybe will curtail and stop that is the dialogue that you and I are having right now.
Yeah.
But you can't stop people putting a entire fandom all to one side and calling everyone one thing. You just have to talk to one person at a time and do the groundwork and the heavy lifting and go door to door, page to page, talking to people and hoping they hear you.
It's like Rose said, right? I hate to be cliched, but it's like she said, that's how we're going to win, not by fighting what we hate, but by fighting
saving what we love.
And that's the thing. And I think that's probably the best advice I would give anybody on Twitter right now, or anybody who's dealing with this, is like, just don't get in those conversations. Open the door and say, hey, you want to talk about it? And as soon as it turns into reading off the Fandom Menace cheat sheet that they've been given, that they're supposed to read off of because they got it from their Geeks and Gamers click site.
Yep.
Then you're done. I'm done. Thank you. We're not having this conversation. Hey, talk to me about why that wasn't your Luke Skywalker, because you may have a really great point, and I'm curious. I may never agree with it, but I want to hear your point. My chiropractor, why didn't he like that Luke Skywalker? That's cool. I get it. But you need to curate what you're a part of in fandom. And, as you were saying before, it is great to have come from a spot where you started these conversations literally sitting in dorm rooms and having conversations and meeting people. And that's something that doesn't exist now. People can shout at me all they want, and I can shout at them all they want, but that just really doesn't get you anywhere.
You can have, obviously, toxic negativity, and you can have toxic positivity.
Yep.
So I feel the type of dialogue, it needs to be a sweet spot where it's just enough, but yet you're not feeding the beast in another way. So it is a big challenge. It's a big challenge, even for us as a channel, for, talking about our dislikes, to keep things positive, but yet, share what doesn't work for us.
Right. And that's a very fine line, because we do live in this, as you were saying before, this culture where, if I lead off a conversation and say, I did not like The Rise of Skywalker, people have stopped listening to me before I talk about why and what I liked about it. And because again, as I said, overall, will I watch it all the time? I would probably watch it more than Last Jedi, just simply because it's a more rollicking space adventure than this. It's a more, for better or worse, it's more traditional Star Wars. I don't know. The challenge is for people like you and I, content creators, people who have opinions, people who, people want to know what you think. It's tough because you have to lead with, here's the thing, I don't like it, but. Right, you have to throw that button so quickly that it almost loses your perspective.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's amazing how I do have a bigger appreciation of content creators now and what everyone has to go through. But stepping away too, I mean, we are lucky that we do have a channel where we're able to do that. Yeah. But complete and utter respect for people who do this, and then it is their job. I mean, I have a completely 8 to 4 Monday through Friday job, and so I don't do this 100% of my time. But for the people who do, oh my God, kudos! I mean, it is a roller coaster of one day you are on cloud 9, and the next your sales have been utterly deflated because of one tweet and how rapid fire it spreads. It's just insanity. But I always try to remember that. Yeah. And it goes back to how my journey started, where I try to remember being that 7-year-old sitting on the couch next to my sister and my mom, and a new hope starts. Yeah. And saving what I love.
Well, Luthien, I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this, and but it is, as you said, you got the 8 to 4. You got to get to that tomorrow morning. So tell people once again where they can find you.
So our main channel is on YouTube. So just search for Girls with Sabers, and you'll see that special icon. Also, we are on Instagram, Tumblr, Twitter. We have a Patreon page. We also have a TeePublic merch page. We're on Facebook. And soon we'll be on Apple and all those podcasty stations. But right now, YouTube is our home base, so that's where we are. And we do have Stream Lounge as well, so we're thinking of streaming movies, commentary along with that. But yeah, main channel's YouTube, and then you can branch out from there if you so wish.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Luthien, thank you so much for joining us. Give my best to Em. Sorry,
I will.
And I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, Pete. I loved being here. Thank you.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Around the Galaxy. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you had fun, please like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at ATGcast or visit our website, atgcast.com. And if you really had fun and would like to be part of the live virtual audience, please feel free to become a part of our Patreon group at patreon.com/ATGcast. Our music is brought to us by the band Silver Colored Knob, who can be found on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you find music. Around the Galaxy is copyright 2021, Pete in the Seat Studios.